Immerse yourself in the world of ancient Central American civilizations, starting with a mind calmed like a gentle breeze through the dense undergrowth of impenetrable jungles. Let the day's worries recede, leaving the listener alone with the night's silence, filled with sounds that existed long before the modern era. This lecture embarks on a journey to places where civilizations flourished among lush rainforests and majestic volcanic valleys, their mysteries still stirring the minds of researchers and historians. Beneath the shade of towering palms and mighty banyan trees, cities arose and temples soared, their peaks lost in the morning mist. We will discuss the history of the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs, peoples with unique knowledge and skills that allowed them to communicate with the stars and gods. Their magnificent cities are now buried beneath dense foliage, and their names are gradually fading from the memory of generations. In the previous lecture, we took a fascinating journey through South America, following in the footsteps of long-lost civilizations, the Andes, Incas, Mochica, Nazca, and other peoples whose traces dotted the valleys and mountain peaks. However, America is a continent of vast scale, and each corner holds its unique history, its melodies, and tragic events. Today, our focus will shift from the inhabitants of the high-altitude regions of Peru and the arid plains of Nazca to the lands located further north, in the heart of Central America. We will explore the territories that now comprise Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Here, a different climate prevails, distinct from that of South America. There are no endless plateaus or majestic Andean peaks. Instead, the region is characterized by humid jungles, erupting volcanoes, vast plains, and dense forests where sunlight struggles to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves. The civilizations of Central America possessed a unique character. Unlike the nomadic tribes of North America, powerful city-states, empires, and cultural centers arose here, leaving behind writing systems, profound astronomical knowledge, and impressive monumental architecture. However, these peoples also had a dark side. Behind their wisdom and the splendor of their temples lay fear and bloodshed, rigid hierarchical systems, and merciless gods demanding sacrifices. Like a captivating yet foreboding night melody, their past echoes with starlight and the shadows of long silenced voices. In this hour, we honor the memory of those who once inhabited this world, paying tribute to the Maya, a civilization that erected majestic cities amidst impenetrable jungles and left behind calendars shrouded in mystery, still sparking heated debates in scientific circles. We will also remember the Toltecs, whose deeds are reflected in the culture of the Aztecs, creators of a dazzling capital on an island in the middle of a lake, whose empire struck terror into the surrounding peoples. But before our imagination transports us to their ancient cities and temples, before we attempt to grasp the secrets of their daily life, culinary preferences, religious beliefs, and the circumstances of their tragic decline, let us pause briefly. For the story of these peoples begins not with the era of flourishing empires and bloody wars, but with the arrival of the first people who set foot on this land along the same paths that led their ancestors to South America. This story begins with ancient hunters and gatherers, with those who, unaware of the future greatness of their descendants, who would build pyramids and cities, roamed the vast plains, pursuing herds of animals and forging their own path in an uncharted world. Today, we will try to follow in their footsteps, listening to the rustling of leaves and the song of the rain, peering into the shadows of ancient temples and deciphering half-forgotten inscriptions carved in stone. We will set ourselves the task of understanding who these people were and what legacy they left us. And perhaps, as you immerse yourselves in this story, your breathing will become more even, and your mind will embark on its own journey to those times where time loses its meaning and history becomes like a dream. Let this dream begin. Chapter 0: The Path of the First Settlers. Long before the construction of the majestic pyramids of Chai or Lan in the heart of Central America, These lands held silent witness to the first steps of humankind. Beneath the blanket of stars and torrential rains, another, no less significant story unfolded, unrecorded in the annals of time. The ancestors of Native Americans began their long journey from the north as nomadic tribes, hunters, and gatherers. In an era when the world looked different and sea levels were significantly lower, a land bridge known as Beringia stretched between the Asian continent and America. It was across this isthmus, thousands of years ago, during the Ice Age, that small groups of people migrated from Siberia to America. They moved following herds of bison and mammoths, obeying the instinct for survival and an insatiable thirst for new discoveries. Their journey was long and arduous, spanning generations. Seasons changed, and slowly but surely, people populated a new continent. They passed through northern lands, developing forests and plains, overcoming mountain ranges and turbulent rivers. Some of them remained in North America, giving rise to tribes that later became known as the Rockies, Navajo, Iroquois, and Leostachevs, wandering along coastlines, making their way through impenetrable thickets and sweltering lowlands. These pioneers faced harsh trials and tribulations. However, nature, as if in gratitude for their courage, rewarded them with generous gifts. In the heart of Central America, they were met with a favorable climate, fertile lands, abundant rivers, and inexhaustible reserves of game. These people, whose roots went back centuries, procured food in rivers and lakes, and their worldview was permeated with faith in spirits and mystical omens. Every element of the surrounding world, whether stone, tree, or beast, was endowed with special meaning. They believed in the spirituality of all things and recognized themselves as only a part of a grand universe. Over time, from generation to generation, their way of life underwent transformation. From a nomadic lifestyle, they transitioned to a settled existence, building primitive dwellings from branches and palm leaves. For the first time, they began to cultivate the land, growing maize, beans, and squash. They gradually subjugated nature, learning the secrets of its generosity and finding ways to resist its unpredictable manifestations. The favorable climate of Central America, in contrast to the harsh northern steppes, allowed for several harvests a year, which greatly facilitated life. The development of agriculture led to the emergence of the first settlements, where nomads found a permanent home. Millennia separate us from that era, and the names and faces of these pioneers have remained unknown to us. However, it was they who laid the cornerstone of the future great civilizations of Central America. Without their efforts, there would be no greatness of the Maya, no power of the Aztecs, no legends of the Toltecs. Archaeologists sometimes find fragments of their ceramic products, traces of ancient campfires, and primitive stone tools, testifying to their existence. Silent relics of bygone eras reveal to us a fascinating picture of the first steps of man in these lands, telling of the birth of a civilization that was destined to reach unprecedented heights. However, between the first timid crops and the majestic Mayan cities, there is a chasm of time, filled with the life and deeds of countless generations. These people loved, built, created, and faded into oblivion, leaving behind only barely noticeable traces of their existence. Their story is like a thin thread stretching through millennia, connecting hunters and gatherers with the powerful rulers and priests of future empires. In the following narrative, we will delve into the study of the development of these early cultures, trace their path from the development of agriculture and the construction of dwellings to the creation of the first myths and beliefs. We will witness their evolution from nomadic camps by fires to the construction of majestic temples and cities rising among the impassable jungles. Long and thorny was the path from the first nomads to the brilliant cities of Central America, a path marked not by writings and chronicles, but by songs and legends. And yet, this path was traversed, and every moment of these people's lives, every deed of theirs became a step on the path to future empires. With the onset of a warming climate and the retreat of glaciers, hunters and gatherers increasingly began to settle on their favorite lands. The fertile soils of Central America allowed them to obtain food year-round without resorting to a nomadic lifestyle. They began to plant wild cereals, carefully care for them, and gradually transitioned to purposeful breeding. About 10,000 years ago, maize, the progenitor of modern corn, was first cultivated here. In those days, it was just a small plant with small cobs. But thanks to hard work and the ability to select the best grains, maize gradually became the basis of nutrition and culture throughout Mesoamerica, becoming a symbol of fertility and prosperity. Along with maize, other valuable crops came to the lands of Central America: beans, squash, hot chili peppers, and cocoa. Ancient inhabitants began to lay primitive irrigation systems, mastering the art of agriculture, creating fertile gardens and vast fields. Thus began a new era in the history of mankind, the era of agriculture and a settled way of life. As agriculture developed, so did settlements. In place of modest hunters' huts, more substantial dwellings made of wood and reeds began to appear, and eventually of durable stone and clay. The first public spaces arose, such as squares, places for gatherings, and rituals. Life was becoming increasingly organized, which in turn influenced people's thinking. The individual, having experienced their power over nature for the first time, began to contemplate their place in the universe. The first notions of gods and spirits emerged, along with the inextricable link between human society and the powerful forces of nature. Myths and legends began to form, destined to become the foundation of religious beliefs of the great civilizations of Central America. It was in these early communities that the first rudiments of calendars and astronomical observations originated. People noticed patterns in the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. They began to mark periods of sowing and harvesting, associating them with the cycles of celestial bodies. This knowledge would later become the cornerstone of the Mayan civilization and other peoples of the region, but its origins lie in the distant past. The life of the first settlers of Central America was full of hardships and dangers. They lived surrounded by wild nature, facing predatory animals and unpredictable natural elements. Their homes could be destroyed by a fierce hurricane, and their harvest ruined by drought. And yet, despite all the difficulties, they did not give up. They built dwellings, cherished hopes, and created works of art. Their days were filled with diligent labor, and their nights with stories told by the crackling campfire, accompanied by the rustling of foliage and the distant hum of the jungle. During archaeological excavations, fragments of their ceramic products and traces of their once existing dwellings are discovered. These artifacts are silent, however, if you are sensitive. Through the veil of time, you can catch their barely audible whisper, telling how a person first comprehended the art of agriculture and turned his gaze to the stars. Over time, these small communities grew, turning into large territorial entities, and interaction between tribes became more intense. The exchange took place not only of food and handicrafts, but also of ideas, myths, and rituals. It was an era when man ceased to be a passive part of nature and began to create his own world, a world in which the first civilizations were born. As we move along this historical path, we will get acquainted with the Mayan people, who became the first outstanding architect of this region. Their majestic cities and temples, their complex calendars and unsolved mysteries, their gods and myths, all this awaits its researcher. But before taking the next step, it is worth stopping and listening. Perhaps, in this silence, the footsteps of those pioneers who once met the dawn over the jungles of Central America and laid the foundation for the construction of their unique world still echo. Chapter 2. The Maya, architects of calendars and megacities in the heart of the jungle. In the silent realm of tropical forests, where the rustling of foliage intertwines with the melodies of birds and the mysterious sounds of invisible inhabitants, monumental temples rise majestically, entwined with the roots of centuries-old trees. These ancient shrines, hidden by emerald greenery, once served as the epicenter of one of the most mysterious civilizations of antiquity, the Mayan civilization. The history of the Maya is a saga of a people who erected amazing cities, developed a complex writing system and astronomical calendars, and built roads and paths through impenetrable tropical thickets. Their worldview was filled with gods and stars, myths and rituals, art and mathematics. Unlike the centralized empires of the Incas or Aztecs, the Maya did not form a single state. Their world was a conglomerate of city-states spread across the territories of modern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. These cities waged fierce struggles for power, formed fragile alliances, fought bloody wars, and exchanged valuable knowledge and cultural traditions. When did the Mayan civilization arise? Researchers believe that the origins of this culture go back to ancient times, to the so-called pre-classic period. The emergence of the first settlements marked the beginning of the formation of a unique Mayan culture. These early communities focused on agriculture, cultivated maize, beans, chili peppers, and cocoa. Piches, or corn, occupied a special place in their lives, being not just a food product, but also a symbol of life itself, the cornerstone of mythology and everyday existence. According to Mayan beliefs, man was created from corn dough, which emphasized the inextricable link between the life and destiny of people. Gradually, these communities expanded and strengthened, and by the beginning of the classical period, around 250 AD, majestic cities such as Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, and many others already stood on the territory of Central America. These cities, surrounded by dense jungles, were striking in their splendor. Pyramids, palaces, markets, and ritual sites testified to the high level of development of civilization. Even today, Mayan architecture evokes admiration. Tall stepped temples, soaring upwards, stone stelae with intricately carved writings and bas-reliefs narrating the deeds of rulers and great events. Writing held a special place in Mayan culture. Unlike many other peoples of the Americas, the Maya created a complex system of hieroglyphs that allowed them to record not only names and dates, but also entire texts, myths, chronicles, and poems, revealing the richness of their spiritual world. Ancient Mayan writings, imprinted on stelae, skillfully drawn on ceramic products, and carefully preserved in codices made from tree bark, convey echoes of their rich culture to us. Perhaps the most interesting and admirable aspect is their complex and mysterious calendar systems. The Maya were skilled observers of celestial bodies, tracking the movement of stars, the sun, the moon, and planets with astonishing accuracy. They could predict solar and lunar eclipses, as well as mark important astronomical events, which testifies to their deep knowledge of astronomy. Their so-called long count, a system of chronology that counts days from the mythical beginning of time, has spawned many myths and legends that stir the imagination to this day. For the Maya, time was not a straight line going into infinity, but a continuous cycle. They believed in the constant rebirth of worlds, in the change of eras, each of which has its beginning and its inevitable end. The Mayan calendars, with their intricate tables and cycles based on the movement of celestial bodies, reflected this cyclical concept of time. However, behind the greatness of knowledge and achievements in science lay a reality full of struggle and contradictions. The Mayan city-states waged constant wars with each other, capturing prisoners for sacrifice, concluding fragile alliances, and betraying allies. The Mayan world was an arena of political intrigue and complex rituals in which blood and faith were inextricably linked. The daily life of ordinary people had little contact with the majestic stone temples and complex astronomical calculations. They toiled in the fields, built dwellings, raised children, participated in rituals and celebrations. Their lives were closely connected with nature, under the scorching sun and pouring rain, under the shimmering stars, and in the shade of impenetrable jungles. In the next part, we will delve deeper into the world of the Maya, We will learn what their cities looked like, what their daily life was like, and what myths and legends defined their worldview. And finally, we will try to solve the mystery of the disappearance of this great civilization, whose traces are now hidden under a veil of tropical greenery. Imagine a majestic Mayan city rising in the heart of an impenetrable jungle. Among the interweaving of vines and tree crowns, accompanied by the chirping of birds and the buzzing of insects, monumental pyramids with steep staircases rise to the sky. Along carefully paved streets, residents move slowly, dressed in exquisitely decorated cotton clothes, complemented by the feathers of exotic birds and the shells of marine inhabitants. In the very center of the settlement is a spacious square where people gather to listen to the wise speeches of the ruler, watch solemn rites, and celebrate significant events. Life in the Mayan civilization was characterized by a strict hierarchy and clear organization. At the head of each city-state stood a kuhun endowed with unlimited power. This ruler was considered not only a political leader, but also a spiritual mediator between ordinary mortals and the divine world. He was surrounded by nobility, consisting of military leaders and priests, as well as numerous farmers, artisans, and merchants, ensuring the vitality of society. At the very bottom of the social ladder were slaves, most often prisoners from conquered cities, doomed to exhausting labor or sacrificed to the gods. Religious beliefs played a primary role in the Mayan worldview. They believed that their world was inhabited by many deities, on whose will all aspects of life depended, from abundant harvests to beneficial rain. Special reverence was given to the gods, personifying the forces of nature: the sun, the moon, maize, rain, and wind. Each day, month, and year were under the patronage of a particular deity, giving them special significance. The Maya represented the universe as a complex, multi-level structure. At the upper level lived omnipotent gods. In the middle was the world of people, and below stretched the ominous underworld of Xibalba, full of dangers and suffering. The Mayan ideas about death were radically different from modern ones. The death of the physical body did not mean the cessation of existence. The soul, freed from its bodily shell, went on a journey through worlds inhabited by divine entities and demonic creatures to eventually be reborn in a new guise. Religious beliefs were deeply integrated into every aspect of daily life in this civilization. With the sunrise, the Maya offered prayers and sacrifices to their gods, seeking to secure their favor. Solemn celebrations were accompanied by colorful dances, melodious chants, and intricate rituals, with sacrifices holding a central place. The Maya believed that blood was the source of life force, and only by shedding it could they appease the gods and ensure their goodwill. They sacrificed drops of their own blood, the blood of animals, and in particularly solemn cases, human lives, captured warriors, slaves, and even innocent children. An important part of Maya culture was ritual ball games, held in specially built stadiums with high walls and stone rings towering over the city squares. These games were not mere entertainment, but had a deep ritual meaning. Sometimes, the losing or winning team was sacrificed to the gods. The rules of the game were complex, and the process itself was brutal and symbolic. The Maya reached unprecedented heights not only in astronomy, but also in craftsmanship. They created exquisite fabrics, jewelry, and ceramic products, decorated with intricate drawings and writings. Maya cities were stunning with their reliefs and sculptures depicting gods, people, and scenes from everyday life. However, behind the external splendor lurked dark shadows. Maya cities constantly competed with each other, forming and breaking alliances and waging bloody wars. Often entire cities were wiped off the face of the earth as a result of these conflicts, and their inhabitants were enslaved or sacrificed to the gods. Behind the scenes of political battles and an insatiable thirst for power unfolds a sinister drama, known today as the decline of the Maya civilization. Cities located in the southern regions gradually become deserted, and majestic temples and palaces are abandoned. Impenetrable jungles relentlessly devour monumental stone structures. The causes of this catastrophe still cause fierce debate among scientists and historians. Some researchers believe that a prolonged drought caused by global climate change played a fatal role. Others blame the depletion of fertile land as a result of irrational and intensive agriculture. Finally, there is a version that political intrigues and internecine wars undermined the fragile balance of Maya society, leading to its inevitable collapse. However, the Maya civilization did not disappear without a trace. In the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula, such prosperous cities as Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan continued to exist. Here, the history of the Maya continued until the 10th century, when Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, heralding a new era. The world of the Maya was complex, multifaceted, and full of contradictions. Their magnificent cities, accurate calendars, fascinating myths, and exquisite art serve as an eternal reminder of the boundless possibilities of the human mind and how fragile a world based on faith and blood can be. In the next chapter, the reader will get acquainted with the people who replaced the Maya, inherited their invaluable knowledge, and created a new, harsh culture. It will be about the people who became a symbol of strength and fear in Central America, the brave and ruthless Aztecs. While the majestic Maya cities located in the southern jungles gradually declined, their temples and palaces were hidden under a cover of foliage and moss. A new civilization was gaining strength in the north of Central America, in the valleys of Mexico. It was a people whose name would eventually become a symbol of order, wisdom, and power. They were called the Toltecs, which in the Nahuatl language meant master, expert in crafts, or scholar. In the eyes of future generations of Central Americans, the Toltecs became a legendary people who possessed secret knowledge of the universe, built majestic cities, and possessed advanced technologies. Subsequent peoples would consider themselves successors of the Toltec civilization, seeing them as a role model. But who were the Toltecs really? According to historians, the Toltecs appeared on the historical stage around the 10th century AD. Their capital, the city of Tula, was built on fertile lands surrounded by hills and rivers, and quickly became a thriving center of trade, crafts, and culture. According to legends, the Toltecs were not only skilled warriors and builders, but also wise teachers who possessed knowledge of creating the beautiful and useful. Their rulers were famous for their wisdom and justice. The architecture, sculpture, and mythology of the Toltecs formed the basis of future legends of Central America, having a huge impact on the development of civilizations in the region. The ancient city of Tula was striking in its magnificence, unheard of for that era. Majestic temples and palaces, decorated with elegant columns and reliefs, towered over the city, testifying to its former greatness. The monumental statues of warriors, set on high platforms, were particularly striking. These stone sentinels, like shadows from the past, still guard the silence of the Tula ruins. The Toltecs, known for their military prowess, extended their influence far beyond their native city. Subjugating neighboring tribes, they created an extensive network of vassal cities and trade routes. Their power was based on strict discipline and cruelty, but they were skilled not only at conquering, but also at effectively managing conquered territories. In Toltec culture, two opposing principles were closely intertwined: light and darkness, creation and destruction. They built cities and roads, developed agriculture and crafts, but their religious rituals were filled with severity, blood, and horror. The central figure in Toltec mythology was the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Legends say that he was a wise ruler and priest who gave people knowledge of writing, crafts, and laws. He rejected bloody sacrifices, striving for peace and harmony. However, the Toltecs also had another god, Tezcatlipoca, lord of the night and sorcery, the embodiment of chaos and cruelty. Once, a conflict broke out between the two gods. Tezcatlipoca tricked Quetzalcoatl into leaving Tula. Since then, the feathered serpent has gone east, vowing to return someday. This legend would play a key role in the history of Central America, and centuries later, people would see in every newcomer from the east the possible return of Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs appear not only as characters in myths, but also as a nation of builders who created complex irrigation systems and developed agriculture. They grew beans, peppers, and raised turkeys. Their artisans were famous for making exquisite fabrics and jewelry. Toltec cities were distinguished by straight streets and majestic temple complexes, but society was strictly hierarchical. At the head were rulers and priests, followed by warriors and nobles, and at the very bottom of the social ladder were ordinary farmers and artisans. Like the Maya, the Toltecs practiced human sacrifices, seeing blood as payment for maintaining order and prosperity. But despite their power and influence, the Toltec civilization could not last long. By the 10th century, Tula was abandoned and the Toltec culture itself declined. The reasons for this fall remain a mystery. Perhaps it was due to internal strife and the struggle for power, perhaps due to drought and soil depletion, or perhaps due to attacks by nomadic tribes from the north. Nevertheless, the image of the Toltecs and their name continued to live in the myths and memory of other peoples. The Aztecs called their great warriors and masters Toltecs, emphasizing their skill and valor. What was the life and beliefs of this people like? And how were their legends passed on to those who would soon build a more powerful empire in Central America? To imagine the world of the Toltecs, one can imagine streets filled with the stomping of feet, the knocking of craft workshops, and the noise of trade. Artisans, priests, warriors, and farmers came out of their houses. Morning mists rose above the city, dissolving in the golden light of the sun, breaking through the hills and stone temples. The heart of ancient Tula was a vast square framed by majestic temples and palaces where the life of the city pulsed. This place served as a center for folk festivals, religious rites, and solemn ceremonies. Here, the ruler and priests addressed the assembled people, conveying their will and instructions to them. Dramatic scenes of human sacrifice also unfolded in this square, which were perceived as a sacred exchange between the world of people and the world of gods. It was believed that the gods grant fertility, send down rains, and warm the earth with the sun, and in return, they demand the most expensive payment from people, blood. Each ritual was a complex ceremony filled with deep symbolism. The sounds of drums and flutes accompanied solemn processions, and warriors led chained prisoners captured in bloody battles. The people believed that death on a stone altar in front of the temple was not the end of earthly existence, but only a transition to another world, the abode of the gods. However, the life of the Toltecs was not limited to sacrifices and bloodshed. Women skillfully engaged in weaving and cooking, creating comfort and providing food for their families. Men worked in the fields, growing crops, and in workshops, creating household items and art. The Toltecs were famous as unsurpassed masters of stone carving and the manufacture of ceramic products. They created complex ornaments and symbolic images, embodying in their works images of gods and people, scenes from myths and historical events. Their products were in great demand far beyond Tula and were highly valued by neighboring peoples. In Toltec culture, the cult of the warrior occupied a special place. The ideal for them was a person who is equally skilled with both a sword, a brush, and a book. They believed that a true Toltec was not only a fearless conqueror, but also an art connoisseur, a wise philosopher, and a talented poet. This idea later significantly influenced the formation of Aztec culture. In Aztec society, the term Toltec came to mean not merely belonging to a particular people, but rather embodying the ideal of a person capable of creating and protecting. In the worldview of the Toltec civilization, rulers and priests saw themselves as guardians of the established order, as a bulwark of stability in a turbulent world. However, despite their efforts, they failed to save their world from destruction. Gradually, internal strife, lust for power, and the invasion of warlike tribes from the north undermined the power and grandeur of Tula, once a flourishing center of civilization. Legends tell us the story of the legendary ruler Quetzalcoatl, who left his city, falling victim to deception by gods and men. After his departure, Tula seemed to be struck by a disease. A period of decline and degradation began. By the 13th century, the city was completely abandoned. Majestic temples and spacious squares were taken over by wild nature, and the streets were deserted, devoid of their former life. Nevertheless, the memory of the Toltecs continued to live in folk legends, passed down from mouth to mouth. They were revered as great teachers, as keepers of lost knowledge, as beacons of wisdom. Their image eventually transformed into a myth so powerful and influential that the Aztecs, who came to these lands centuries later, built their ideology on the foundation of the Toltec heritage. This is a cautionary tale about the transience of the human world, about how fame and knowledge, achievements and victories can eventually turn into only a quiet rustle of grass in the gusts of wind, a faint echo wandering among ancient ruins. In the next chapter, we will turn our gaze to those who replaced the Toltecs, to the empire that flourished in the heart of Central America. Their history will be filled with both moments of great power and dazzling beauty, as well as episodes that horrify with their cruelty and bloodshed. But before we embark on this journey through time, I suggest we pause for a moment and listen to the wind, which carries to us the whisper of the stone warriors of Tula, silent witnesses of past grandeur. Chapter 4. Aztecs, the greatness and tragedy of the empire of sun and blood. After the mysterious disappearance of the Toltecs, when their majestic cities turned into silent ruins overgrown with grass, and the temples became only an echo of a bygone era, Central America plunged into a period of instability for some time. In the shadow of the former greatness of Tula, among the picturesque lakes and hills of the Valley of Mexico, a new force began to form imperceptibly. A people whose name would later be surrounded by a halo of legends and fear, the Aztecs, a people whose path to greatness was long and thorny. Legends say that they came from the distant north, from the mythical land of Aztlan, a land inhabited by herons. Wandering in search of the promised land, foretold by the gods, they believed that they would find their home where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus and devouring a snake. After many years of wandering, in 1325, on one of the islands of Lake Texcoco, the long-awaited sign appeared to them, an eagle soaring above a cactus. It was here that they founded Tenochtitlan, which was destined to become the brilliant capital of their future empire. The Aztecs began their journey as an outcast people, nomads deprived of land and power. However, over time, they transformed into one of the most powerful civilizations in Central America. Their history is a tale of rapid ascent, bloody wars, outstanding achievements, and tragic decline. Tenochtitlan, built on the marshy shores of the lake, became a testament to the engineering genius of the Aztecs. They skillfully built canals and dams, erected embankments and bridges, created unique floating gardens known as chinampas, where they grew maize, beans, tomatoes, and peppers, ensuring the prosperity of their people. The city of the Aztecs was an amazing combination of waterways and monumental stone structures, immersed in the greenery of gardens and majestic temples, bustling market squares, and luxurious palace complexes. In the very heart of Tenochtitlan rose the Templo Mayor, the grand Great Temple, dedicated to the two supreme deities of the Aztec pantheon, Huitzilopochtli, who personified the sun in war, and Tlaloc, the lord of rain and water. This temple served as a visible symbol of the Aztec world order, based on the fragile balance between life and death, water and fire, order and chaos. Aztec society was characterized by a strict hierarchical structure. At the head of the state stood the Tlatoani, the supreme ruler, whose name translated as "he who speaks," possessing unlimited power. Below him was the nobility, consisting of priests, military leaders, and senior officials. The foundation of Aztec society was composed of common people, farmers who ensured food security, artisans who crafted everyday objects and works of art, and merchants who facilitated the exchange of goods. At the lowest rung of the social ladder were slaves, primarily prisoners of war, who were deprived of any rights. Unlike their predecessors, the Maya and the Toltecs, the Aztecs distinguished themselves as skilled conquerors. They established the powerful Triple Alliance, uniting Tenochtitlan with the cities of Texcoco and Tlacopan. Through their combined efforts, they subjugated dozens of peoples inhabiting Central America and created a vast empire that stretched for thousands of kilometers. However, their dominion was not based solely on military might. The Aztecs developed a complex system of taxation and trade control. Subjugated peoples were obliged to regularly supply the capital with maize, cotton, cacao beans, exotic feathers, precious stones, and slaves. In the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan, one could find goods brought from all corners of the empire, from the vibrant feathers of the quetzal to obsidian. But behind the external splendor and prosperity lurked a dark shadow. The Aztec world was permeated with fear and cruelty. Their religious beliefs demanded constant sacrifices to the gods, and human blood was considered the most valuable offering. The Aztecs, a warlike and mystically inclined people, believed in the unceasing need of the celestial luminary for vital energy to continue its majestic journey across the sky. They were convinced that without the nourishment of blood, the sun might stop forever, plunging the world into an abyss of utter darkness. For this reason, sacrifices were an integral part of their unique culture, permeating all aspects of existence. Captives, seized in countless battles and bloody wars, became victims atop the majestic Templo Mayor. There, priests, clad in ritual garments, performed the rite of heart extraction, casting the crowds into sacred awe. These ceremonies, filled with mystical horror and religious ecstasy, turned into grand spectacles, drawing the entire population of the city into their vortex. Dances, mesmerizing music, and solemn processions accompanied each stage of the rite, amplifying its impact on the senses and consciousness. Victims included not only brave warriors, but also innocent children, young girls, and sometimes even Aztec leaders themselves, willing to give their lives to save their people in moments of profound crisis. However, it would be a mistake to reduce the life of the Aztecs solely to bloody rituals and sacrifices. This civilization gave the world a constellation of talented poets and profound philosophers, skilled artisans, and outstanding scholars. They created exquisite ceramic objects, striking in their beauty and elegance, wove magnificent fabrics adorned with intricate patterns, and crafted jewelry sparkling with gold and precious stones. The poets of the Aztecs composed poignant verses about life and death, about the splendor of the surrounding world and the transience of human existence, prompting reflection on eternal questions. In the subsequent sections of this chapter, we will delve deeper into the daily life of the Aztecs to learn how they built their majestic city, how the common people lived, what festivals and rituals filled their days, and how tragic fate led this great empire to inevitable collapse. Tenochtitlan, a mirage-like city, a marvel of its time, arose in the middle of the water. Europeans, who first saw it in the 16th century, were amazed by what they saw and left enthusiastic descriptions of this city, sprawling in the middle of the lake. It was connected to the shores by a complex system of stone dams and wooden bridges, representing an engineering marvel. The city glistened with white stone buildings, was immersed in the greenery of gardens, and was permeated by a network of canals, along which boats plied, filled with juicy fruits, fragrant flowers, and bright fabrics. A measured life pulsed in the very heart of Tenochtitlan. With the first rays of the sun, the streets came to life, filled with the hum of merchants, skilled artisans, and peasants who had come from the surrounding villages to offer their goods in the market. In the main square stretched Tlatelolco, a grandiose central market where one could find practically everything, from golden grains of maize and fragrant cacao beans to exquisite jewelry and exotic animals. Coins did not jingle here. Instead, cacao beans and skillfully woven cotton fabrics, which served as a kind of Aztec currency, were in use. The daily life of ordinary Aztecs was built on the solid foundation of family, hard work, and deep religiosity. Men spent their days cultivating fields, creating formidable weapons, or honing their skills in various crafts, while women skillfully prepared food, engaged in weaving, and cared for the home. Their diet was simple but rich in nutrients: corn tortillas, hearty beans, juicy squash, and spicy chili peppers. During festive occasions, tables were adorned with chocolate treats, fresh fruits, tender turkey, and the bounty of rivers and lakes, fish. Education was held in high esteem. All children, regardless of social standing, had the opportunity to attend schools. Boys were taught military arts, literacy, and were acquainted with laws, history, and religious doctrines, while girls were instructed in various crafts, music, and intricate rituals. Two types of educational institutions existed: Telpochcali, for the children of commoners, and Calmacac, where the offspring of noble families were educated, preparing them to become priests and high-ranking officials. Aztec culture, imbued with profound lyricism, saw the true purpose of human existence in flowers and songs, a vivid allegory for art, poetry, and philosophical contemplation. Poets of the time celebrated the ephemerality of being, fleeting beauty, and the transience of life, finding in them a source of inspiration and wisdom. Only for a time are we guests on this earth, come to rest, to surrender to sleep, read one poetic masterpiece, reflecting their worldview. However, behind this refined perception of the world lay a harsh order based on perpetual warfare. The Aztecs regularly engaged in so-called flower wars, the purpose of which was not to annihilate the enemy, but to capture prisoners for sacrifice. These carefully planned ritual battles were intended to maintain the delicate balance between worlds, ensuring harmony in the universe. Aztec priests, who were also sages, astronomers, and political figures, played a crucial role in society. They maintained complex ritual calendars, marking auspicious and perilous days for various endeavors and actions. The Aztecs, like their Mayan predecessors, used two calendar systems: a ritual calendar, 260 days, and a solar calendar, 365 days, combining them into a 52-year cycle, after which, according to their beliefs, the world could come to an end. They believed in the existence of 5 suns, 5 epochs, and considered that previous worlds had been destroyed by terrible catastrophes, leaving behind only memories and warnings. In the minds of the ancient Aztecs lived an unwavering belief: the celestial luminary needed constant replenishment with blood in order to continue its life-giving journey. Otherwise, as the legends foretold, the world would plunge into impenetrable darkness. This sinister doctrine permeated all spheres of life, from government decisions to the construction of monumental structures. However, despite its seeming invincibility, the Aztec Empire harbored deep fissures. Its greatness was based on fear, and the brutal suppression of conquered peoples. The heavy burden of exorbitant taxes engendered a deep-seated hatred for the rulers, ready to erupt at any moment. In 1519, Hernán Cortés, the leader of a small detachment of Spanish conquistadors, landed on the coast of Mexico. For many oppressed peoples, his arrival was a long-awaited ray of hope, a harbinger of liberation from the hated yoke. Cortés did not advance towards Tenochtitlan alone. His army was augmented by thousands of warriors from the Tlaxcalan, Totonac, and other tribes, enemies of the Aztecs, eager for revenge. Montezuma II, the ruler of the Aztecs, was held captive by ancient prophecies about the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wisdom and justice. He mistook Cortés for the embodiment of this deity, making a fatal mistake that led to the demise of himself and his entire people. Soon Tenochtitlan was besieged. Temples which served as symbols of faith and power were reduced to ruins. The streets of the city were stained with blood. Along with the Spaniards came diseases against which the indigenous population had no immunity. Epidemics claimed the lives of millions of people. The empire, which had seemed eternal, collapsed within a few years. On its ruins arose a new world, with different laws, religious beliefs, and language. But even after the fall of Tenochtitlan, in legends, folk songs, and among the majestic ruins of temples, the memory of a people who lived under the sun, desperately fought for its light, and believed that their blood could stop the encroaching darkness was preserved. Leaving aside the tales of great empires, the next chapter will unveil the everyday life of the inhabitants of Central America. The reader will see not only rulers and priests, but also simple laborers, mothers, warriors, and children. The author invites us to look into their humble dwellings, blooming gardens, and immerse ourselves in their beliefs to feel the pulse of Mesoamerica in the passage of days. Chapter 5 will be devoted to daily life and routines. When it comes to the civilizations of Central America, such as the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs, one typically envisions majestic temples, ritual sacrifices, and bloody wars. However, behind this splendor, behind the scenes of political intrigue and myths, lies the most important thing, the everyday life of millions of people who, like us, lived, worked, raised children, loved, and experienced fear. It was with their hands that cities and temples were built. It was their tireless labor that filled markets and fields with life. It was their dreams and concerns that formed the foundation of great empires. The everyday world of the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs was simple and clear. Their lives were inextricably linked to nature, with its eternal cycles and rhythms. With the first rays of the sun, people rose, worked from dawn to dusk, and revered the rain, the earth, and the corn. Agriculture was the basis of their existence. Corn, or maize, was not only the cornerstone of their diet, but also the center of their culture. They made tortillas, porridge, and drinks from it. Their diet also included beans, squash, chili peppers, and tomatoes. This balanced and nutritious set of foods sustained the lives of millions of people. In those days, when technology had not yet touched agriculture, cultivating the land was exclusively manual labor. Farmers showed wonders of ingenuity, growing maize on terraces skillfully created on hillsides, and even on floating islands called chinampas, turning swampy areas into fertile gardens. They possessed deep knowledge of natural cycles, accurately determining the time of sowing and harvesting, guided by the phases of the moon and sun, relying on the wisdom of their ancestors and the instructions of priests. In settlements, whether modest villages or bustling cities, houses were built from available materials: reeds, wood, stone, and clay. Roofs were covered with palm leaves, creating coolness on hot days. Inside the dwellings, the furnishings were modest: sleeping mats, clay pots for storing supplies, and simple fabrics. The fire, burning steadily in the center of the house, served as a source of heat and light, a place for cooking, and the center of the family hearth. The family was the cornerstone of society. People lived in large, multi-generational families, united under one roof. Women managed the household, weaving and preparing food, while men worked in the fields or engaged in trade. Children were introduced to work from an early age, learning to respect their elders and worship the gods. Life was permeated with festivals and rituals. Each month was dedicated to specific deities who patronized nature, harvest, or war. People gathered in the squares to make offerings, perform ritual dances and chants. These rites could be modest home offerings to the spirits of ancestors or large-scale urban ceremonies filled with music, dance, and in some cases, sacrifices. Music was a constant companion of human existence. The rumble of drums, the gentle sounds of flutes, the muffled voices of shells, and rhythmic rattles filled the streets and dwellings. People raised their voices in songs, praising the gods, love, and the beauty of nature. Dances served not only for entertainment, but were also an integral part of ritual acts, a way of establishing a connection with spirits and deities. Crafts, passed down from generation to generation, occupied a special place in life. Masters skillfully wove fabrics from cotton and agave fibers, created elegant ceramics, carved wood and stone, and made jewelry using obsidian, jade, and gold. Craftsmen worked in their homes or offered their products in the markets, where you could find everything your heart desired. Trade played an important role in everyday life. In large cities, such as the majestic Tenochtitlan or Chichen Itza, markets became a place of attraction for thousands of people. There was a lively trade in all kinds of goods: food, fabrics, jewelry, tools, and even slaves. The market was not only a center of trade, but also a place for exchanging news, socializing, and holding festive events. Most of the time, people spent outdoors, enjoying the generous gifts of nature. Life flowed in harmony with the natural rhythms, alternating rains and droughts, holidays, and hard work. People built houses, raised children, and cared for the elderly. Their days were filled with worries, but also with joy. It was in this everyday life, in simple cares and rituals, that the true soul of Central American civilization lay. Not in the majestic pyramids and bloody wars, but in the thin haze of morning fires, in the ringing voices of children, in the aroma of maize and pepper, in the joyful laughter in the market, and in the soothing rustle of rain on the thatched roofs. In the next part of this chapter, we will look more closely at how these people lived and thought. What traditions of child rearing, relationships in the family, and with neighbors existed in their society. We will try to look at the world not through the eyes of priests and rulers, but through the eyes of ordinary people living under the patronage of the stars of Mesoamerica. In Mesoamerica, the existence of the average person was not limited to working days and celebrations. The foundation of their being was deeply rooted traditions, unshakable foundations, and sincere reverence for family ties, communal values, and the native land. From birth, a person became an integral part of a complex system permeated with customs and strict rules. The birth of a child into a family was accompanied by a series of ritual actions. Astrologers possessing special knowledge determined the exact day and hour of birth to predict the newborn's fate. It was believed that the date of birth had a direct impact on a person's character, luck, and life's purpose. If the birthday was considered favorable, the child was prophesied fame and prosperity. Otherwise, it was recommended to observe special rituals and make sacrifices to change the predestined fate. Boys were taught labor and military affairs from an early age. They helped their fathers in the fields, mastered the skills of making weapons, construction, and hunting. From a young age, they realized that their duty was to become warriors, craftsmen, or farmers to ensure the well-being of their family and community. Girls were taught weaving, cooking, housekeeping, and childcare, passing on knowledge about everyday life, medicinal herbs, and traditions. Their lives were devoted to family, raising children, housekeeping, and participating in rituals. In Mesoamerican civilizations, the upbringing of the younger generation was of paramount importance. Children were raised in an atmosphere of strictness combined with sincere care. From an early age, they were instilled with deep respect for elders, hard work, and modesty. In Mesoamerican families, it was considered unacceptable to be lazy or neglect established community laws. From childhood, young members of society went through initiation rites, marking their transition into adulthood. Boys were sent to special schools known as Selpochkali or Kalmikak, where they received a comprehensive education. There, they studied not only the military arts necessary to defend their lands, but also delved into the depths of poetry, music, and ancient laws passed down from generation to generation. Girls were prepared for their future role as keepers of the home, instilling in them the skills of housekeeping and caring for the family. Marital unions in Mesoamerica were not just the union of two hearts, but carefully thought-out agreements between families. When concluding a marriage, factors such as social status, pedigree, and favorable astrological dates were taken into account. Wedding celebrations were accompanied by lavish feasts, ritual dances, and ceremonies, symbolizing the beginning of a new life for the newlyweds. Family played a central role in the life of Mesoamerican society. People lived in large, extended families where parents, children, grandparents, and great-grandparents gathered under one roof. Elderly family members were held in special esteem, and their wise advice was valued and taken into account. Family ties were incredibly strong, and each person felt an integral part of something larger and more meaningful. However, the life of Mesoamericans was not limited to family. Outside the home, there was another, broader family, the community. People lived in close interaction with each other, providing mutual assistance in fieldwork, construction, during holidays, and in times of grief. There was a complex system of mutual assistance and division of labor in the communities, ensuring the well-being of all its members. Meetings were held regularly in villages and towns to discuss and resolve important issues related to land use, taxation, and construction. The existence of the average person was permeated with many rituals and ceremonies. Every dawn began with a reverent offering to the divine forces. A few sparkling drops of water, a freshly baked tortilla, and fragrant flowers were placed on the altar. People were convinced that these modest gifts maintained the harmony of the universe. They believed that without these daily offerings, the heavenly luminary might refuse to give its light, the life-giving rains would not irrigate the land, and the generous harvest would forever disappear from the fields. Holidays played an exceptional role in the life of society. Each celebration was dedicated to a specific deity or phenomenon of nature, causing awe and reverence. On these days, people gathered in spacious squares where they danced, sang praises, and performed sacred rituals in unison. Some festivities were accompanied by sacrifices, but most were filled with enchanting music, abundant feasts, and exciting games. The ball game, which was very popular throughout Mesoamerica, was a symbolic reflection of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, life and death. Sometimes, the losers in this sacred game became victims offered to the gods. Various crafts occupied an important place in everyday life. Men and women skillfully wove fabrics, created ceramic items, and crafted delicate jewelry and essential tools. Weaving was considered not just a craft, but a true art form. Every woman learned the secrets of this skill from a young age, passing down knowledge and abilities from generation to generation. Ceramic items served not only a utilitarian function, but were also works of art. Pots and bowls were meticulously decorated with scenes from myths and legends, figures of animals, and images of gods. These vivid depictions served as a kind of book for those who were illiterate. Ancient peoples existed in an amazing symbiosis with the environment, carefully observing the celestial bodies. Their worldview was saturated with a belief in spirits that inhabited everything around them. They believed that every tree, stone, and animal possessed its own soul, recognizing the world as a living organism and humans as only an integral part of it. Death was not perceived as the ultimate end of existence. They believed in an endless cycle of rebirths, in the existence of divine worlds and spiritual entities. The souls of departed ancestors were believed to continue to be invisibly present, providing help and protection to their descendants. Sacrificial gifts of food, clothing, and tools were given to the deceased to ease their transition into the other world. In this simple but profoundly meaningful life, there was much more meaning than might appear at first glance. These people did not strive for fame or conquest. Their lives were devoted to family, their native land, and the worship of gods. Their daily concerns were filled with labor, but also with joy, beauty, and the observance of ancient traditions. In the next chapter, we will explore in more detail the spiritual world of these peoples, their religious beliefs, and shamanic practices. We will learn how they imagined the universe, what rituals they performed, and how their religion was inextricably linked to every aspect of their lives, from birth to death. Chapter 6: Shamanism and Religion of Central America. In the Mayan, Toltec, and Aztec civilizations, religion was not simply a set of abstract dogmas, but rather a living fabric that permeated all spheres of life, from the construction of magnificent cities to the harvesting of crops, from the birth of a new person to their last breath. Every element of the surrounding world, stone, rain, day, was filled with deep meaning and symbolic signs. At the heart of their worldview was the concept of universal animation. Trees, rivers, stars, animals, and people were connected by invisible threads, forming a single whole. In ancient civilizations, deities lived in close proximity to humans, overseeing, judging, making demands, and rewarding according to merit. Humans were not perceived as the pinnacle of creation, but only as a component of the grandiose picture of the universe. The pantheon of gods was distinguished by its scale and diversity. The Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs worshipped gods representing the sun, rain, corn fertility, warfare, and the realms of the underworld. Each day and month was under the patronage of a specific deity, and any event was associated with the influence of spirits. The gods were not merciful in the usual sense. They represented natural forces, often indifferent and harsh. To maintain world order, ensure the sunrise, rainfall, and fertility of the earth, appeasement of the gods through sacrifices was required. Religious ceremonies were practical. In every dwelling, there was a small altar with an image of the family's patron deity. People began and ended their day with prayerful appeals. In the cities, majestic temples rose, where priests conducted complex ritual ceremonies. The lives of the priests were inextricably linked with serving the gods, but they also served as astronomers, historians, and poets. Priests kept the calendar, determined auspicious days for agricultural work, marriages, and waging wars. Their knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, shrouded in mystery. Shamans occupied a special position in society, possessing the ability to communicate with spirits, heal diseases, and foresee future events. They resorted to the use of medicinal plants, ritual chants, dances, and ceremonies to achieve altered states of consciousness and interaction with the other world. In any ancient settlement in Central America, there was always a person endowed with a special gift, a medicine man. People turned to him for wise advice, healing, and reliable protection from evil spirits, which, according to beliefs, dwelled everywhere. The cultures of this region were permeated with rituals in which psychoactive plants capable of altering consciousness were actively used. Priests and shamans, mediators between the world of humans and gods, used tobacco, peyote, sacred mushrooms, and other plants that plunged them into a state of trance. In this altered state, they believed they could communicate directly with the gods, receiving valuable prophecies and uncovering the hidden causes of the illnesses that plagued people. The cult of Quetzalcoatl, the majestic feathered serpent, held a special place in religious beliefs. This god embodied wisdom, strict order, and untamed creative power. Temples were erected in his honor, lavish offerings were made to him, and hymns of praise were composed. Myths told of Quetzalcoatl constantly opposing Tezcatlipoca, the powerful god of darkness and chaos, who sought to destroy the harmony of the world. Belief in the existence of an underworld full of mysteries and dangers was an integral part of the religious worldview. People believed that after death, the soul journeyed to Xibalba, a dark realm where harsh trials and unbearable suffering awaited. Only the chosen ones, those who fell in battle, were sacrificed on the ritual stone, or died in childbirth, were honored to enter the solar realm, where eternal life reigned. Life and death were not seen as opposites, but rather as interconnected parts of a single, endless cycle. The Aztecs believed that the world had already been created and destroyed 4 times, and the current fifth world needed constant nourishment, with energy, blood, and human hearts to prolong its existence. These ideas formed the basis of numerous rituals and festivals that filled the lives of ancient civilizations. Throughout the year, various ceremonies were held. Some, joyful and bright, were accompanied by dances, lively music, and theatrical performances. Others, on the contrary, were somber and bloody, dedicated to gods who demanded sacrifices. But behind all this external splendor lay a simple and unsettling thought. The world is fragile and dangerous. People had no illusions about the benevolence of the universe. They knew that the gods were capricious and unpredictable, and to appease them, it was necessary to strictly observe all the rites and rituals passed down from generation to generation. Memory through the ages, history and legacy of Mesoamerican civilizations. In the heart of the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica, where mysticism and reality intertwined, rituals and spiritual practices held a special place. Religious rites, performed by priests and shamans, not only reflected belief in the gods, but also shaped the worldview of entire peoples. Modern researchers seek to understand the deeper meaning of these traditions, analyzing their influence on the culture and consciousness of descendants. The religion of the peoples of Central America was a complex system of rites, rules, and symbols that permeated all aspects of life. Each ritual, from a modest offering to a large-scale sacrifice, had its own meaning and purpose. Priests and shamans played a key role in these practices, possessors of sacred knowledge and mediators between the world of people and the divine. They deciphered the signs of fate, interpreted the will of the gods, healed ailments, and instructed rulers. Their power, reinforced by fear and respect, allowed them to influence the course of history. Sacrifices, which aroused awe and horror among European colonizers, were an integral part of the religious life of the Maya and Aztecs. These rites, according to ancient peoples, maintained cosmic balance and ensured the prosperity of the world. The blood and hearts of sacrificed people were considered food for the gods, giving life to the sun, fertility to the earth, and abundant harvests. Sacrifices were performed with great solemnity. Huge crowds gathered in the squares to watch prisoners of war being led to the top of the temple. There, priests, dressed in ritual clothing, extracted their hearts and raised them to the sky, as if offering them to the sun itself. This terrifying but sacred act symbolized the connection between the earthly and heavenly worlds, affirming the inextricable interdependence of man and gods. Ancient rituals were not always accompanied by bloodshed. A significant part of religious ceremonies was reduced to offering gifts in the form of food, fragrant flowers, and aromatic incense, as well as performing ritual dances and solemn chants. Masters created elegant wreaths of feathers from exotic birds. Weavers skillfully made festive robes, and cooks prepared exquisite dishes intended exclusively for special occasions. Music, with its mesmerizing rhythms of drums, melodic singing, and theatrical performances, was an integral part of every celebration. Priests and shamans were credited with the unique ability to heal ailments, foresee future events, and exorcise evil spirits from the world of people. To achieve these goals, they resorted not only to prayers and magical spells, but also used special plants that could alter the state of consciousness. One such plant was peyote, a small cactus with psychoactive properties. Ipomoea seeds, datura, and tobacco were also used in ritual practices. Under the influence of these substances, shamans plunged into a state of trance. In those distant times, such states were perceived as divine revelation, as a way to connect with spirits and gods. During these mystical ceremonies, people believed in the possibility of seeing their fate, obtaining healing from diseases, or drastically changing the course of their lives. However, modern researchers offer a different interpretation of these ancient practices. Scientists agree that hallucinatory experiences can distort the perception of reality and introduce destructive changes in the functioning of the brain. Many states that were previously interpreted as divine revelations are now explained from a scientific perspective as intoxication of the body and complex neurochemical processes. Psychiatrists and anthropologists emphasize that regular immersion in such practices could have serious negative consequences for mental health, ranging from the development of mental disorders and depressive states to a complete loss of connection with the surrounding world. Ritual trances, in addition to vivid visual hallucinations, were often accompanied by physical exhaustion, seizures, vomiting, and even death. However, within the cultural context of those times, such rituals were an integral part of the worldview and social structure. People sincerely believed that through suffering and self-torture, they gained a deep understanding of the universe, and by opening the gates to otherworldly realms, they gained the ability to influence the course of events and control the forces of nature. This belief encompassed both a poetic perception of the world and a primal fear of the unknown, the beauty of spiritual quests, and the pain of physical torment. Ritual practices served as a reflection of ideas about the fragility of human existence, about the fact that life is not an unconditional gift, but rather a vulnerable agreement with higher powers, requiring constant confirmation and sacrifice. In the modern world, we view these ancient practices through the prism of scientific knowledge and humanistic values. We realize that the existence of the world does not depend on bloody sacrifices, and hallucinations are just complex processes occurring in the brain under the influence of neurotransmitters. Nevertheless, in cultures such as the Mayan and Toltec civilizations, such rituals served as a way of knowing oneself and the surrounding world, a way of overcoming fear of the unknown, and seeking answers to fundamental questions of existence. In the next chapter, we will leave aside our religious beliefs and rituals to focus on the daily life and worldview of the people who inhabited Mesoamerica in various historical periods. We will discuss the reasons for the decline of great civilizations, their disappearance, and the legacy they left behind. Chapter 2: Contact with Europe and the Tragedy that Followed. The history of the great civilizations of Central America, such as the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs, for millennia was a series of periods of prosperity, military conflicts, and the pursuit of harmony with the environment. Their cities grew and developed, their culture became more refined, and their political power became more solid. However, at the beginning of the 15th century, their world faced a previously unknown force that came from the east, across the ocean, from a completely different world. This force appeared on sailing ships in the form of foreigners, dressed in armor, armed with firearms, and accompanied by animals never before seen in Mesoamerica. For many residents of Central America, these newcomers became the embodiment of ancient prophecies, harbingers of future changes, and for some, even the return of the gods. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico. At that time, he was a little-known captain, but his expedition forever changed the course of the continent's history. He had only about 600 soldiers, a few dozen horses, and artillery at his disposal. Against the backdrop of millennia-old civilizations, this seemed like madness. But the Spaniards possessed what the Aztecs did not: cold calculation, steel, and deadly diseases. Cortés realized that he could not conquer the Aztec Empire by military force alone, so he decided to use another resource: the discontent and hostility of the peoples enslaved by the Aztecs. The Aztec Empire was based on fear and exorbitant taxes. So many tribes dreamed of freedom. Cortés offered them an alliance. Among those who supported the Spaniards were the Tlaxcaltecs, an ancient people who had long feuded with the Aztecs. They knew the area well, the secret paths and weaknesses of their enemies. Thousands of their warriors joined the conquistadors, and together they moved on Tenochtitlan. The arrival of the Spaniards in the lands of the Aztecs was met with caution, bordering on horror. Ancient legends predicted the return of the fair-skinned god Quetzalcoatl from the eastern lands, and many saw in Cortés the embodiment of this prophecy. Montezuma II, the ruler of the Aztecs, exercised caution and did not immediately engage in open confrontation. Instead, he graciously welcomed the foreigners to his capital, showering them with honors and valuable gifts. The majestic Tenochtitlan amazed the Spaniards. In their chronicles, one can find admiring descriptions of its architectural splendor: temples, bustling markets, and skillfully laid canals. However, behind the external admiration lay greed and a thirst for unlimited power. Peaceful coexistence was short-lived, and it was soon replaced by mutual distrust and growing tension. The Spaniards, having treacherously captured Montezuma, turned him into a puppet, obediently carrying out their will. But the proud city did not resign itself to the fate of being conquered. In 1520, a powerful uprising broke out, forcing the Spaniards to flee Tenochtitlan on a night that would later go down in history as the Night of Sorrows. However, this was only a temporary respite. Cortés, having gathered new forces and secured the support of allied tribes, once again besieged Tenochtitlan. The siege lasted for many months and was particularly brutal. Hunger, disease, and thirst mercilessly mowed down thousands of lives. At the same time, deadly diseases spread throughout the lands of Central America. Along with the Spanish conquerors came smallpox, measles, and influenza, previously unknown to the local population who had no immunity to them. Epidemics swept across the continent, claiming millions of lives, far exceeding the number of victims from the swords and cannons of the conquistadors. In August of 121, the majestic Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, fell under the onslaught of the Spanish conquerors. The city, once gleaming with splendor and power, was reduced to ruins, and its inhabitants became victims of ruthless extermination. In its place, like a phoenix from the ashes, arose Mexico City, the new capital of New Spain, a symbol of colonial domination. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, not only the history of one of the greatest empires of Mesoamerica came to an end, but also an entire era. The conquest of Central America became a tragedy that befell millions of indigenous people, whose destinies were intertwined with the arrival of foreigners. The old order, which had shaped the way of life for centuries, collapsed under the blows of colonial power. Traditions passed down from generation to generation were forgotten or brutally suppressed. In this chapter, we will turn to the consequences of this clash of civilizations, to how the life of the peoples of Mesoamerica changed after the establishment of Spanish rule. We will explore the cultural shock and tragedy imprinted in historical memory. After the destruction of the magnificent Aztec civilization, the Spanish conquistadors and their allies launched a relentless offensive on the lands that had recently flourished under the shadow of ancient gods. Gradually, step by step, they transformed the life, culture, and traditions of the indigenous peoples, turning them into the colony of New Spain. The world that had existed here for millennia disappeared with astonishing speed. Cities turned into silent ruins. Temples that once served as centers of spiritual life lay in desolation. Priests and scholars, keepers of ancient knowledge, perished or were enslaved. Along with them disappeared the priceless heritage of generations, calendars, writing, myths, music, and poetry. The Spaniards brought with them not only weapons and a thirst for profit, but also a new religion, language, and laws. In place of the majestic temples of the Maya and Aztecs, Christian churches were erected, and the indigenous people were forced to adopt a new faith, forcing them to abandon their old gods and customs. Many rituals and traditions were outlawed, and sacred books were burned. The Mayan codices, in which the history and mythology of the people were recorded, were almost completely destroyed. Only a few of them managed to survive, becoming invaluable testimonies of a bygone era. The most tragic consequence of Spanish colonization was the spread of diseases to which the indigenous people had no immunity. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, typhus, and influenza spread with incredible speed, outpacing the advance of the conquerors. Within a few decades, the population of Central America decreased many times over, entire settlements died out within a few months, and there was no one to pass on the songs and stories of ancestors to posterity. It was not just the death of civilizations, but a cultural catastrophe that destroyed the worldview, memory, and identity of millions of people. For those who survived the epidemics and wars, life changed forever. The world became alien with new laws, foreign gods, and an unfamiliar language. However, despite the darkness and devastation, the ancient culture did not disappear without a trace. Folk memory, like a weak but unquenchable light, continued to smolder. Many customs, legends, and beliefs were preserved in hidden forms, in songs, dances, and ornaments, which, under the guise of Christianity, preserved elements of old rituals. Legends of the feathered serpent, songs of past eras, tales of heroes and gods were passed down from mouth to mouth in families and rural communities. People continued to honor the spirits of the earth and water, the sun and moon, albeit secretly. The echo of great Mesoamerica still resonates in the language, in the faces of the descendants of the Maya and Aztecs, in the patterns on clothing, in the traditions of holidays, and in the ruins of cities lost in the jungle. Beneath a layer of foliage and time, the steps of temples and stone stelae with forgotten inscriptions are hidden, reminding us of the former grandeur of ancient civilizations. The conquest of Central America turned into one of the deepest tragedies in the annals of mankind, leaving an indelible mark on the face of the continent. It led to the disappearance of flourishing civilizations and formed a gaping void that seems impossible to fill. Nevertheless, the memories of those who inhabited these lands, built magnificent cities, studied the celestial bodies, and worshipped their deities, continue to live on. Their narrative is not just a chronicle of days gone by, but also a cautionary tale about how fragile the world can be and how easily what has been built over centuries can be destroyed. In the final chapter, we will take a retrospective look at our journey. We will honor the memory of the peoples who were represented in this study, and we will attempt to understand what place their legacy occupies in our memory and in the global history of mankind. Chapter 3 is devoted to the question of the origin and meaning of the word Indians. In the modern world, this term seems commonplace and established, a simple way to refer to the indigenous people of America. However, behind this word lies a long and convoluted history full of misconceptions, colonial prejudices, and forgotten truths. In essence, the emergence of the word Indians is a consequence of a historical error. In the distant year of 1492, when Christopher Columbus reached the shores of the Caribbean, He was convinced that he had finally discovered a new sea route to the mysterious India. The navigator had no idea that before him lay a completely new continent, unknown to Europeans, full of secrets and unexplored lands. That is why he christened the indigenous inhabitants of the new lands Indios, which in Spanish means Indians, thus immortalizing his historical mistake. Despite the misconception, the name firmly took root in the European consciousness and spread throughout the world. Soon the word Indians became the generally accepted designation for the indigenous population of both Americas, from the vast expanses of Alaska to the harsh lands of Patagonia. However, such a generalization proved to be too superficial and did not reflect the full diversity of cultures and peoples. Under the single name Indians were hidden hundreds and possibly thousands of distinctive peoples, each with its own unique language, culture, and worldview. In English, the word Indians was used for a long time to avoid confusion with the inhabitants of India. In the modern world, the terms Native Americans or First Nations are increasingly used, especially in Canada, in recognition of their history and heritage. In Spanish, the term indigenous peoples, has taken root, and in French, Amérindien. In Russian, the word Indeytsi, Indians, has historically been entrenched, but in scientific and ethnographic works, it is customary to specify the region of residence, Indians of North, Central, or South America, in order to emphasize their cultural and geographical characteristics. How did the indigenous people of America themselves define their identity? The answer to this question is as multifaceted as the peoples themselves. The Mayan civilization, for example, identified itself by the names of ethnic groups or linguistic communities, Quiche, Yucatec, Lacandon, and others. The Aztecs proudly called themselves Mexica, which eventually transformed into the modern name of the country, Mexico. The Inca Empire majestically called itself Tawantinsuyu, which symbolized their power over the four corners of the world. In the vast expanses of the north, the Cherokee, Navajo, and Apache tribes carefully preserved their unique names and traditions. The word Indians became a kind of label imposed by European colonizers, simplifying and leveling the rich palette of cultural differences. However, the centuries following the conquests and colonization have radically changed the attitude towards this term. Today, many indigenous peoples of America rightly prefer to be addressed as they call themselves. They are actively reviving their languages, restoring traditions, and rewriting the history that has been tried to erase from memory for so long. In the context of this work, the author uses the term Indians in its generally accepted meaning as a collective concept to refer to the peoples of Central America, whose amazing cultures, majestic cities, and distinctive customs will be studied in detail. At the same time, emphasis is placed on respectful attitude and deep understanding that there is much more behind this word than it may seem at first glance. This chapter serves as a reminder that history is not just a set of simplified labels, but a complex mosaic woven from many voices, names, and destinies. The goal of this journey is to hear these voices, even if they have to break through the noise of time and distortions of others' interpretations. It is noteworthy that the Russian language has historically developed a more convenient situation than in many other languages. The inhabitants of India and the indigenous peoples of America are clearly distinguished, Indians and Native Americans. This linguistic division has avoided the confusion that still occurs, for example, in English, where the word Indian has long been used to refer to both groups. The Russian language, as if foreseeing possible misunderstandings, took care of clarifying the matter, even if the original etymology of the name was associated with a historical error. Drawing a line under this exciting journey into the depths of centuries, we can say with confidence that a whole galaxy of images, destinies, and events that left an indelible mark on human history has appeared before our mind's eye. At the same time, it is as if we have walked the roads once trodden by millions of people whose names, unfortunately, are buried under the weight of time. We looked into cities lost in impenetrable jungles, climbed the steps of majestic pyramids with trepidation, felt the piercing gaze of stone gods, and caught the barely audible whisper of long-forgotten myths and legends. This amazing saga begins with the appearance of the first hunters and gatherers in the lands of Central America, who, of course, could not even imagine that they were destined to become the ancestors of great peoples. We witnessed how unique cultures were born in picturesque valleys surrounded by majestic volcanoes, how mighty cities grew out of modest communities, and how the heavenly vault above the tropical forests resounded with melodious songs and the radiance of stars. We remembered the mysterious Maya, ingenious builders of cities that rose in the heart of impenetrable jungles, experts in the secrets of the universe and time, creators of complex calendars and majestic temples who managed to survive entire eras. We touched the legacy of the Toltecs, fearless warriors and wise teachers who founded the legendary city of Tula and left behind legends of incredible strength and wisdom, of a civilization that became a real myth for posterity. It is impossible to ignore the dizzying rise and tragic fall of the Aztecs, whose empire, which arose on a small island in the middle of a lake, held all the surrounding peoples in fear, but at the same time created an exquisite and unique culture. We remembered simple farmers and talented artisans, loving mothers and caring fathers, carefree children and wise old people who lived under the hot sun of Mesoamerica, worked tirelessly, loved with all their hearts, and experienced genuine fear of the unknown. We heard their heartfelt songs and soulful prayers, saw their innermost fears and bright hopes, got acquainted with their formidable gods, mysterious rituals, and unwavering faith in the fragility of the surrounding world. We learned about all-powerful priests and wise shamans, about rituals in which beauty and horror were intricately intertwined, about magic, which for them was a very tangible reality. Ultimately, the world became the arena of a dramatic clash of civilizations, a clash that led to the destruction of cities and cultural values, leaving behind only chaos, the spread of diseases, and deep silence. But despite the fall of great empires, their history has not been forgotten. It continues to live in ancient stones, in fertile land, in the genetic memory and memories of descendants, in the unique language and melodious songs, in the faces of modern residents of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Although they often talk about forgotten civilizations, the truth is that they have never been completely forgotten. Their presence is felt everywhere, in the twinkling stars of the night sky, in valuable archaeological discoveries, in the words and legends that still echo in the tropical forests of Central America. As long as we preserve the memory of them and pass on their stories from generation to generation, they continue to live among us. And now, when the darkness of night envelops everything around, when eyelids become heavy and thoughts flow freely and smoothly, let these ancient stories penetrate your consciousness. Let them become an integral part of your dreams, just as they have become part of the collective human memory. The world is vast and full of many forgotten voices, but every word spoken, every memory preserved, every story passed on brings them back to life, at least in our minds.